The winter wind howled through the city streets, sending scattered newspapers dancing across the sidewalk. It was one of those bone-chilling December evenings when most people rushed home to their warm beds and hot meals. The local grocery store's neon sign flickered against the darkening sky, casting colorful shadows on the fresh snow that had begun to fall. Emmy, a high school junior known for her bright smile and kind heart, pulled her coat tighter around herself as she stepped out of the store. Her mom had asked her to pick up some milk and bread before heading home, and she was glad to help, even in this harsh weather. The plastic bag swung gently in her hand as she walked, her boots making soft crunching sounds in the fresh snow. That's when she saw her, an elderly woman sitting on a cardboard box near the store's entrance. The woman's thin jacket was no match for the bitter cold, and her hands shook as she tried to warm them with her breath. Most people hurried past, their eyes fixed straight ahead or glued to their phones, pretending not to notice. But Emmy couldn't look away. The woman's silver hair peeked out from under a worn-out hat, and her face showed years of stories written in its wrinkles. Despite her circumstances, there was a dignity about her that touched Amy's heart. The woman wasn't begging or asking for help. She just sat there, trying her best to stay warm in the unforgiving weather. Emmy stood there for a moment, remembering her grandmother's words. Sometimes, the biggest changes start with the smallest actions. Her grandmother had always taught her that kindness wasn't just about grand gestures, it was about seeing someone in need and doing what you could, even if it seemed small. Taking a deep breath, Emmy walked over to the woman. Up close, she could see the woman's lips had turned slightly blue from the cold. "Hi there," Emmy said softly, trying not to startle her. "Would you like to come inside the store where it's warm?" The elderly woman looked up, surprise flickering across her weathered face. It had been a while since anyone had stopped to talk to her. "Oh dear, that's very kind of you," she replied, her voice gentle but trembling from the cold. "But I wouldn't want to cause any trouble." "It's no trouble at all," Emmy insisted, offering her hand. She noticed the woman's hesitation, pride and necessity wrestling in her expression. The woman introduced herself as Rose, her voice carrying a hint of refinement that suggested she hadn't always lived on the streets. As Rose slowly stood up, Emmy could see how the cold had stiffened her joints. Without thinking twice, Emmy unwrapped the warm, hand-knitted scarf from around her neck. The scarf was special. Her grandmother had spent weeks making it for her birthday last year, choosing the softest yarn in Amy's favorite colors. But right now, Rose needed it more than she did. "Here," Amy said, carefully wrapping the scarf around Rose's neck. "This will help keep you warm." The woman tried to protest, but Amy gently insisted. "My grandmother always says a scarf carries the warmth of the person who gave it. I'd like you to have this warmth." Rose's eyes welled up with tears as she touched the soft wool. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman," she said, her voice cracking slightly. I had a granddaughter once." She stopped herself, as if the memory was too painful to continue. Amy guided Rose into the store, where the warm air immediately brought color back to the older woman's cheeks. They found a quiet corner near the store's small coffee station, and Amy bought them both hot chocolate. As they sipped their drinks, Rose slowly began to share pieces of her story. She spoke about her husband's passing, the mounting medical bills, and how quickly life can change. One day you're planning your retirement, and the next. She trailed off, staring into her cup. Amy listened intently, not judging, just being present with this woman who had seen both better and worse days. Other customers in the store cast curious glances their way. An unlikely pair sharing hot chocolate on a cold winter evening. But Emmy didn't care. In Rose's stories, she heard echoes of her own grandmother's wisdom about life's unexpected turns and the importance of treating everyone with dignity. As the store's closing announcement echoed through the speakers, Emmy realized she needed to head home. Her mom would be wondering where she was, but she couldn't bear the thought of Rose going back out into the cold. "Let me call the local shelter," Emmy offered. "They might have a warm bed for tonight." Rose hesitated again, but the kindness in Amy's eyes seemed to reach something deep within her. Perhaps that would be wise," she agreed quietly, adjusting the scarf around her neck. "You know, dear, sometimes angels don't have wings. They have kind hearts and warm scarves." Emmy pulled out her phone, determined to make sure Rose would be safe for the night. As she dialed the number for the local shelter, she had no idea that this simple act of kindness, stopping to help when others walked by, would set in motion events that would change not only Rose's life, but the entire community. But that's often how the most meaningful stories begin, with one person deciding to care. The shelter's phone line was busy. Annie tried 3 times, each ring echoing her growing concern. The store would close in 15 minutes, and she couldn't bear the thought of Rose spending another night in the freezing cold. While they waited, Rose's trembling hands clutched the paper cup of hot chocolate, now nearly empty. "Maybe we should try another shelter," Amy suggested, scrolling through her phone. The warmth of the store had brought some color back to Rose's cheeks, but her eyes held a distant look that made Amy's heart ache. It was the kind of look that spoke of countless nights spent wondering how life had taken such an unexpected turn. Rose adjusted the scarf around her neck, her fingers lingering on the carefully knitted pattern. "You know," she said softly, "I used to knit scarves like this one." Her voice carried a hint of pride mixed with sadness. "I taught art at the community center for 30 years. Had my own little craft circle every Wednesday afternoon." Amy leaned forward, genuinely interested. "Really? What happened to the craft circle?" "Oh, it's still there," Rose replied, a small smile touching her lips. "But after Harold, my husband, got sick, I couldn't keep up with it anymore. The medical bills came first, then the mortgage payments. You'd be surprised how quickly a comfortable life can slip away." The overhead lights flickered, a 5-minute warning before closing time. Amy felt torn between her responsibility to get home and her concern for Rose. She thought about her own grandmother, who always said that family wasn't just about blood, it was about who you chose to care for. "I have some money saved up," Amy said, reaching for her backpack. "We could get you a room at the motel down the street just for tonight." She had been saving that money for a new phone, but right now, that seemed incredibly unimportant. Rose's eyes welled up with tears, but she gently shook her head. "No, sweetheart. You've already done more than enough." She touched the scarf again. "This warmth, this kindness, it means more than any motel room could." Just then, Amy's phone buzzed. It was her mom, wondering where she was. Amy quickly explained the situation, her words tumbling out as she described meeting Rose and trying to help. There was a moment of silence on the other end. "Put me on speaker," her mom said finally. When Amy did, her mom's warm voice filled their quiet corner of the store. "Rose, I'm Linda, Amy's mother. Would you like to come stay with us tonight? It's supposed to drop below freezing, and we have a spare room." The invitation hung in the air. Rose's hands trembled as she wiped away a tear. I couldn't impose," she whispered, but her voice wavered with hope. "It's not an imposition," Linda assured her. "Any friend of Amy's is welcome in our home. We can figure out a more permanent solution tomorrow, but for tonight, please let us help." The store manager, who had been pretending not to listen, suddenly appeared with a fresh cup of hot chocolate for each of them. "On the house," he said quietly, giving Amy an approving nod. "Take your time finishing these. I've got some cleaning to do anyway." It was his way of saying they could stay a few extra minutes while they sorted things out. Rose looked at the scarf, then at Amy, then at the phone broadcasting Linda's patient waiting. "Your grandmother," she said to Amy, "the one who made this scarf, she taught you well, didn't she?" Amy smiled, remembering all the times her grandmother had opened their home to others in need. "She always says that sometimes the biggest gifts come wrapped in the simplest moments." Finally, Rose nodded, accepting the invitation with quiet dignity. As they waited for Linda to arrive, Rose shared more about her life, teaching art to children, the community projects she'd organized, the lifetime she'd spent making others' lives brighter through creativity and kindness. Now, through an unexpected twist of fate, she was on the receiving end of that same kindness. Linda arrived 15 minutes later, her car warm and welcoming. As they helped Rose into the passenger seat, Amy noticed how the older woman clutched the scarf like a lifeline, not just for its warmth, but for what it represented: hope, kindness, and the reminder that even in our darkest moments, we're not alone. The store manager watched them leave, a gentle smile on his face. As their car pulled away, the neon signs reflected off the fresh snow, creating a soft glow that seemed to follow them home. None of them knew it yet, but this simple act of kindness, a teenager sharing her scarf, a mother opening her home, A stranger becoming family would spark a chain of events that would touch their entire community. In the car, Rose dozed off, still wearing the scarf. Emmy watched from the backseat as streetlights painted shadows across the older woman's peaceful face. Her phone buzzed with another message, her grandmother, responding to the quick update Emmy had sent her. "Remember, dear one, every act of kindness creates ripples we can't see. I'm proud of you." Emmy smiled, watching the snow fall outside her window. Sometimes the best stories don't start with grand gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes they start with a simple scarf, a cup of hot chocolate, and the courage to see the humanity in a stranger's eyes. Across town, in a warmly lit office at the police station, Chief Robert Wilson rubbed his tired eyes as he stared at the photo on his desk. The image showed him and his mother at his promotion ceremony 5 years ago, both of them smiling, his mother's eyes twinkling with pride as she pinned the badge on his uniform. Now, that same photo was part of a missing persons file that had haunted him for the past 3 months. The night she disappeared still played in his mind like a movie he couldn't stop. He'd gone to check on her before bed, like he always did since she moved in with him after his father's passing. But her room was empty, the bed still made, and her winter coat missing. No note, no phone, no wallet, just gone into the night. "Still here, Chief?" Officer Chen asked, poking her head into the office. She'd been helping coordinate the search since day one, understanding all too well what it meant to worry about an aging parent. Her own father had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia last year. "Just going over everything again," Robert replied, spreading out the reports on his desk. Missing persons flyers, security camera footage, witness statements, 3 months of searching that led nowhere. The doctors had warned him about his mother's depression after his father died, about how dementia could make someone act unpredictably. But knowing the medical facts didn't make the reality any easier to bear. His phone buzzed. Another automated alert about tonight's weather warning. Temperature dropping below freezing, heavy snow expected. Each cold night brought fresh waves of worry. Where was she sleeping? Was she warm enough? Was she even? He couldn't finish the thought. "You should go home, get some rest," Officer Chen suggested gently. "The patrol units know to keep looking. We've got eyes everywhere." Robert nodded absently, but they both knew he wouldn't leave. Not yet. He picked up another report, a list of homeless shelters and soup kitchens their officers had checked. His mother, Rose Wilson, former head of the city's art council, beloved community teacher, now possibly among the homeless people she'd once helped through her charity work. The irony wasn't lost on him. The radio on his desk crackled to life with routine patrol updates. He listened with half an ear until something caught his attention. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. Temperatures dropping fast. Got several homeless folks heading to the shelter on Pine Street. Making sure everyone's got somewhere warm to go tonight." Robert reached for the radio, then stopped himself. How many times had he rushed out on similar calls, hoping against hope? The first month, he'd responded to every possible sighting, every vague report of a woman matching his mother's description. But each time, the hope turned to disappointment, leaving him more drained than before. Officer Chen set a fresh cup of coffee on his desk. "You know what the counselor said," she reminded him quietly. "Taking care of yourself isn't giving up on her." He wrapped his hands around the warm cup, remembering how his mother used to bring him hot chocolate on late study nights when he was preparing for the police academy. "Did I tell you she used to run an art program at the community center?" he asked, though he'd probably shared this story before. Every Wednesday, she'd teach seniors how to knit scarves and blankets. Then they'd donate everything to the homeless shelter. "She sounds like an amazing woman," Officer Chen said, sitting down across from him. "Tell me more about her." "She believed everyone had a story worth hearing," Robert continued, his voice soft with memory. "After Dad got sick, she spent every spare moment with him in the hospital. But even then, she'd knit while sitting by his bed, blankets for other patients, scarves for the nurses. Said it helped her feel useful when everything else felt out of control." The radio crackled again with more routine updates. Outside, snow began falling more heavily, coating the city in white. Somewhere out there, his mother was either safe and warm, or he pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the photo on his desk. Her kind eyes, her gentle smile, the way she always saw the best in everyone, even when life was at its hardest. The doctors said the dementia might make her confused, maybe even make her forget where she lives, he said, more to himself than to Officer Chen. But how could she forget she has a son who's looking for her? A son who needs her to come home. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking another hour in another long night of waiting. Robert pulled his mother's case file closer, starting again from the beginning. Tomorrow would mark 3 months since she disappeared. 3 months of searching, hoping, praying. 3 months of jumping at every phone call, rushing to check every reported sighting. What he didn't know, couldn't know, was that at that very moment, his mother was falling asleep in a warm bed, wrapped in a hand-knitted scarf given to her by a kind-hearted teenager. The next 24 hours would change everything. But for now, in his quiet office with the snow falling outside, Chief Robert Wilson did what he'd done every night for the past 3 months. He kept searching, kept hoping, kept believing that somewhere out there, his mother was waiting to be found. Morning sunlight filtered through fresh snow, creating diamond-like sparkles on the sidewalk outside Linda's house. Rose sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in the borrowed scarf, her hands cupped around a steaming mug of coffee. The night's rest in a warm bed had brought some color back to her cheeks, though her eyes still held that faraway look of someone trying to piece together scattered memories. "These pancakes smell just like the ones I used to make," she murmured, watching Linda flip another golden circle onto a growing stack. "My son, he always loved them on Sunday mornings." Her voice wavered slightly, as if uncertain whether this was a real memory or just a dream. Amy, still in her pajamas, sat across from Rose, watching her with gentle concern. The morning light caught the silver in Rose's hair, making it shimmer. There was something regal about her, even in borrowed clothes, that spoke of a different life. One lived in comfort and dignity before circumstances changed everything. Outside, Officer Jenny Lee was starting her morning patrol, her police cruiser moving slowly through the snow-covered streets. It was her first winter on the force, and she took pride in checking on the community's most vulnerable residents during these cold snaps. As she passed Linda's house, something caught her eye, a flash of familiar colors. She slowed the car, her heart beginning to race. The scarf around the elderly woman's neck, visible through the kitchen window, she'd seen it countless times before. It was the exact pattern shown in the missing persons bulletin, the one Chief Wilson had distributed 3 months ago with a picture of his mother wearing it at a community center event. Jenny's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 8. I need to confirm something. Can you send me the Wilson missing persons photo?" The image appeared on her patrol car's computer screen moments later. She looked at the photo, then back at the window. The woman's hair was different now, longer and unkempt, her face thinner. But those eyes, that gentle profile. "Dispatch, contact Chief Wilson immediately. I think I found his mother." Inside the house, no one noticed the police car or the flurry of radio activity it generated. Rose was sharing stories about her craft circle, her voice growing stronger as she remembered details about her students, the projects they created, the lives they touched. Linda and Amy listened, exchanging quiet glances. There was so much wisdom in this woman, so much love to give. How had she ended up alone on the streets? The sound of approaching sirens made them all look up. Linda went to the window, confused to see 3 police cars pulling up outside her house. "Stay here," she told Amy and Rose, moving toward the front door with a mixture of concern and curiosity. But before she could reach it, there was a knock. When she opened the door, she found herself face to face with a man in a police chief's uniform, his badge gleaming in the morning sun. His eyes were red-rimmed, as if he hadn't slept in days, and his voice shook as he spoke. "I'm Chief Robert Wilson. We received a report." He stopped, his voice catching as he heard a familiar voice from the kitchen. "Robert?" Rose stood in the hallway, the scarf trailing from her shoulders like a colorful lifeline connecting past to present. "Robert, is that really you?" The chief's professional demeanor crumbled. In 3 long strides, he crossed the space between them, gathering his mother in his arms. "Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with tears. "Mom, I've been looking everywhere for you." Amy and Linda stood back, watching this miracle unfold in their hallway. Rose's confusion seemed to lift like morning fog as she held her son, her hands remembering the shape of his face, his shoulders, the badge she'd pinned on his uniform so proudly years ago. "I got lost," she said softly, touching his cheek. "The days got mixed up after your father, and then I couldn't remember the way home. But this sweet girl," she turned to Amy, reaching for her hand. "She gave me her scarf when I was cold. She and her mother gave me a warm bed when I was lost." Robert looked at Amy and Linda, gratitude overwhelming him. "Thank you," he managed to say. "Thank you for taking care of my mother when I couldn't find her." Outside, neighbors had begun to gather, drawn by the police cars and the emotional scene visible through the open door. Officer Lee stood at her patrol car, smiling through tears as she watched the reunion. Sometimes, she realized, the best moments in police work had nothing to do with enforcing laws. They were about bringing families back together, about healing what was broken. Amy stepped forward, touching the scarf that had brought them all together. "My grandmother always says that love finds its way home," she said quietly. "Like a thread that connects hearts, no matter how far apart they might be." Rose smiled, one hand holding her son's, the other clasped in Amy's. In that moment, standing in a stranger's hallway on a snowy morning, surrounded by people who had become family overnight, she felt something she thought she'd lost forever. She felt found. By noon, the grocery store's security footage was playing on every local news channel. The simple scene kept repeating. A young girl removing her scarf to help a homeless woman, leading her into the warmth of the store, sharing a moment of kindness that would change both their lives. The store manager had tears in his eyes as he shared the footage with reporters. "I've worked here for 20 years, he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You see all sorts of things in this job, but this was different. The way that girl didn't hesitate, didn't judge, she just helped. Pure and simple." Chief Robert Wilson stood in his office, watching the news coverage on the small TV mounted on the wall. His mother Rose sat nearby in a comfortable chair, properly dressed and warm, the colorful scarf still draped around her shoulders like a badge of honor. They needed to find the girl who had helped her, but Rose couldn't remember many details from her confused days on the street. "She had the kindest eyes," Rose said softly, touching the scarf. "Like sunshine through honey. And her mother's name, Linda. Yes, Linda. They gave me shelter when I was lost." Officer Chen was already working her magic with the computer databases. "If she's a high school student named Amy with a mother named Linda, we can narrow it down," she said, fingers flying over the keyboard. "The grocery store's in the North District, so she probably lives nearby." Meanwhile, at school, Amy had no idea she had become the subject of a citywide search. She sat in her history class, thinking about Rose and hoping she was okay after spending the night at their house. Her phone buzzed quietly in her pocket, another message from her grandmother who had seen the news. "Your mom just called me," the message read. "Turn on the TV when you get home. Your simple act of kindness is touching hearts across the city." The afternoon sun was casting long shadows when Amy finally walked home from school. She noticed more cars than usual on her quiet street and a few news vans parked near the corner. Still unaware of why, she turned onto her driveway, adjusting her backpack strap. That's when she saw them, 3 police cars parked outside her house. Her heart skipped a beat, worry flooding her mind. Had something happened to her mom? But then she noticed the news cameras, the small crowd of neighbors, and in the center of it all, a familiar face wearing her grandmother's scarf. "There she is," Rose called out, her voice strong and clear, so different from the confused whispers of the night before. She stood next to a tall man in a police chief's uniform who turned to look at Amy with eyes full of gratitude. Amy froze on the sidewalk, suddenly understanding. The lost woman she'd helped wasn't just any homeless person, she was someone's mother, someone's missing loved one. And now they had found her, all because of a scarf and a cup of hot chocolate. Linda appeared on the porch, smiling through happy tears. "Come here, sweetheart," she called to her daughter. "There's quite a story you need to hear." As Annie walked toward the house, neighbors she'd known all her life watched with proud smiles. Mrs. Thompson from next door was dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Mr. Rodriguez, who ran the corner store, stood with his phone up, recording the moment. "Emmy," Chief Wilson said, stepping forward. "I'm Robert Wilson, Rose's son. For 3 months, I've been searching for my mother. She has early-stage dementia, and one night she just walked away from home. We've been looking everywhere, following every lead, hoping and praying. Rose reached for Amy's hand, squeezing it gently. But then an angel found me, she said softly. An angel with a warm scarf and an even warmer heart. The news cameras moved closer, reporters waiting with microphones, but they kept a respectful distance, recognizing the power of this moment. This wasn't just another heartwarming story for the evening news. This was proof that even in a world that sometimes seemed cold and uncaring, kindness could still work miracles. Amy's phone buzzed again, her grandmother watching it all unfold on live TV from her nursing home across town. "That's my girl," the message read. "Remember what I always tell you. Kindness is like a boomerang. It always comes back around." A young reporter finally stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Amy, what made you stop to help when so many others walked by?" Amy looked at Rose, then at her mother, then at the scarf that had started it all. "I just did what anyone should do," she said simply. "My grandmother taught me that everyone deserves to be treated with kindness and dignity. I didn't do anything special. I just saw someone who needed help and helped." The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Neighbors had brought out chairs, cookies, and thermoses of hot chocolate, turning the impromptu gathering into a celebration of community. Rose sat surrounded by people who cared, wearing a scarf that had become more than just wool and yarn. It had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures could bridge the biggest gaps between people. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the fresh snow glistening like diamonds under the winter sun. Andy woke up to the sound of gentle voices downstairs and the smell of fresh coffee wafting through the house. Yesterday's events felt almost like a dream, but the news vans still parked outside proved it had all been real. In the kitchen, Linda was already up, making breakfast and talking quietly with Rose and Chief Wilson, who had stopped by on their way to the police station. The chief looked different today, rested, lighter somehow, as if months of worry had finally lifted from his shoulders. "Good morning, sweetheart," Linda called as Amy appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas. "You might want to get dressed. There are some people coming to see you." Before Amy could ask who, the doorbell rang. Outside stood Mayor Thompson, along with several city council members and a small group of community leaders. They carried flowers, cards, and something that looked suspiciously like a formal certificate. The city council held an emergency meeting last night, the mayor explained once everyone was settled in the living room. Her eyes were warm as she looked at Amy. "We've been trying to address the homeless crisis in our city for years, but sometimes it takes a child to show us the way. Your simple act of kindness has touched more hearts than you know." Rose sat next to Amy on the couch, still wearing the now famous scarf. "When I was running the community center's art program," she said, her voice clear and strong, "we always talked about how creativity could build bridges between people, but sometimes the strongest bridges are built with simple kindness." Chief Wilson stepped forward, unfolding a piece of paper. "The police department would like to announce the creation of a new program," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority but also deep emotion. "We're calling it the Warm Hearts Initiative. Starting today, every patrol car will carry emergency supplies, blankets, scarves, basic necessities to help homeless individuals in crisis." The mayor nodded approvingly. "And the city council has agreed to increase funding for mental health outreach programs and emergency shelters. Sometimes it takes a story like this to remind us of our responsibilities to each other." Amy listened, feeling both overwhelmed and deeply moved. She hadn't done anything extraordinary, just what her heart told her was right. But somehow, that simple choice was creating waves of change throughout the community. A soft knock at the door revealed more visitors. The grocery store manager where it all began, along with several of his employees. They carried bags full of groceries and a large envelope. "We took up a collection," the manager explained, his eyes misty. "Not just from our store, but from shops all over town. People saw the security footage and wanted to help. They wanted to show that your kindness inspired them to be better, to do more." The envelope contained gift cards for local stores and restaurants, meant not just for Amy's family, but to be distributed to others in need. "We're starting a pay-it-forward program at the store," one of the employees explained. "Customers can buy extra groceries or supplies that will go directly to local shelters." As the morning went on, more people arrived. Teachers from Amy's school bringing news that they were starting a kindness awareness program. Local business owners pledging support for homeless outreach initiatives. Even Amy's grandmother had been brought over from her nursing home, beaming with pride as she watched her granddaughter become the catalyst for community-wide change. "You see," her grandmother said, taking Amy's hand, "kindness is like planting a seed. You never know how big it might grow." Chief Wilson shared updates about his mother's condition. Rose would need ongoing care for her dementia, but she was already showing improvement just from being back in a stable environment, surrounded by love and support. "The doctors say familiar routines and positive interactions are crucial," he explained, "which is why we'd like to ask a favor." He turned to Amy and Linda. "Would you be willing to visit regularly? Mom seems more focused, more present when she's talking about art and crafts. Maybe we could even restart her old knitting circle." Rose's eyes lit up at the suggestion. "Oh, we could teach others to make scarves like this one," she said, touching the colorful wool around her neck. "Imagine, a whole community connected by threads of kindness." The local news crews had returned, but they kept a respectful distance, capturing the natural unfolding of community spirit rather than trying to manufacture moments for the camera. They understood that the real story wasn't just about a lost mother found, it was about how one genuine act of kindness could awaken the best in everyone it touched. As the winter sun climbed higher, warming the snow-covered streets, Amy looked around her crowded living room. Neighbors chatting with city officials about new outreach programs. Police officers and store employees exchanging ideas about helping the homeless. Her grandmother teaching Rose a new knitting pattern while they talked about starting a multi-generational craft group. Linda wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "You know what makes me proudest?" she whispered. "Not all this attention or these programs, though they're wonderful. It's that when you saw someone in need, you didn't wait for permission or recognition. You just helped. That's the purest kind of kindness there is." 1 year later, the community center buzzed with activity on a crisp autumn afternoon. The large room that once sat empty now hosted the Warming Circle, a weekly gathering that had grown from Rose's original knitting group into something much more meaningful. Elderly residents sat alongside teenagers, their needles clicking steadily as they worked on scarves and blankets. Rose, now healthy and fully present, moved between the groups, offering guidance and sharing stories. Her dementia had stabilized with proper care and medication, and the routine of teaching had helped anchor her memories. "Remember to keep the stitches loose on the edges," she advised a young boy who was working on his first scarf. "That way, it'll be extra comfortable for whoever receives it." The boy nodded seriously, his tongue sticking out slightly as he concentrated on his work. In one corner, Amy's grandmother supervised a group of nursing home residents who had been brought in for the session. Their wheelchairs were arranged in a comfortable circle, their hands busy with yarn and needles, their faces bright with purpose. The isolation that often came with age had been replaced by the warmth of community connection. Chief Wilson, who now made it a point to stop by whenever his schedule allowed, stood in the doorway watching the scene. The past year had brought changes he never could have imagined. The Warm Hearts Initiative had expanded beyond his police department to neighboring cities, creating a network of support for homeless individuals across the region. "Dad, look," Rose called out, holding up her latest creation, a complex pattern of interweaving colors. "This one's for the shelter's welcome packages." Her eyes were clear and focused, her movements confident. The confused, lost woman from a year ago seemed like a distant memory. Linda, who had taken on coordinating the volunteer schedule for the group, worked at a desk nearby, matching finished items with requests from local shelters and hospitals. Each piece was tagged with a small card that read, "Made with love by the Warming Circle, because everyone deserves to feel wrapped in kindness." The local news crew had returned for their annual follow-up story, but they found something far more significant than just an anniversary piece. The reporter watched as Amy helped a new volunteer learn the basic stitches, her patience and kindness mirroring the act that had started it all. "It's amazing," the reporter said quietly to Linda. "We cover a lot of feel-good stories that fade away after the cameras leave. But this has taken root and grown into something real." She was right. The initial media attention had sparked something, but it was the community's sustained response that had created lasting change. The city council's increased funding for homeless services had led to the opening of a new shelter with mental health services. The grocery store's Pay It Forward program had spread to businesses throughout the city, creating a network of support for those in need. Amy, now a year older and wiser, still had the same gentle spirit that had prompted her to help Rose that cold winter night. But she'd grown too, learning about community organizing, about the complexities of homelessness and mental health, about how small actions could spark big changes. "You know what the best part is?" she said to her mother as they watched the room full of people working, talking, and laughing together. "It's not just about the scarves anymore. It's about seeing each other, really seeing each other." The foundation that Chief Wilson had established in Amy's name had already awarded its first round of scholarships, helping students who demonstrated exceptional commitment to community service. But more than the financial support, it provided mentorship and networking opportunities, creating a new generation of community leaders. As the afternoon light slanted through the windows, Rose gathered everyone for their weekly tradition. Each person held up their finished piece: scarves, blankets, hats, all made with care and attention. Then Rose told the story that everyone knew but never tired of hearing. The story of a cold night, a warm scarf, and how one moment of kindness had rippled outward to touch countless lives. "Sometimes people ask me if I remember that night clearly," Rose said, touching the original scarf that still hung in a frame on the wall. "The truth is, much of that time is still foggy in my mind. But I remember the feeling, the warmth of being seen, of being treated with dignity when I felt most lost." That's what we're really making here, you see. Not just scarves and blankets, but moments of connection, threads of hope that bind us all together. The boy with his first finished scarf held it up proudly. It wasn't perfect. There were dropped stitches and uneven edges, but Rose beamed at him with genuine pride. "Beautiful work," she said. "Now, who would you like to give it to?" He thought for a moment, then looked at a shy new girl who had been watching from the doorway, hesitant to join in. Walking over, he held out the scarf with a simple gesture that echoed Amy's action from a year ago, an invitation to belong, to be warm, to be part of something bigger than oneself. As the day drew to a close, Amy helped clean up the yarn and needles, listening to the happy chatter around her. Her grandmother's words from so long ago came back to her. "Kindness is like a boomerang. It always comes back around." But now she understood it wasn't just about kindness returning to the giver. It was about how kindness, when nurtured by a community, could grow into something sustainable, something that could warm hearts and change lives long after the initial act was just a memory.